Hello, I'm giving my oral presentation about PTSD for Comp 2 with Professor McGriff. PTSD is a disorder that's developed after a shocking, scary, or dangerous event. It causes intrusive thoughts, hyperarousal, flashbacks, nightmares, sleep disturbances. It can also cause changes in memory and in concentration. But in order for it to be diagnosed as PTSD, you must have experienced those symptoms for at least 2 weeks after the incident. And you must have been in fear for yourself or someone you loved. PTSD also causes emotional disturbances, and it can be caused by emotional disturbances such as abuse, child neglect, seeing a death, or seeing something traumatic happen to someone you love. It's typically seen as a military issue because a lot of our soldiers came back from the war with it. However, it is common and everyday from people who have had car crashes or have been involved in a fire or seen a major injury or had a major injury happen to them. And also for children who've been neglected and not fed or given proper clothing or taken care of properly, oftentimes are found to have PTSD. PTSD affects the amygdala, which is responsible for the flight or fight response, and it deals with your emotions. The fight or flight response is what causes us to either go into battle to protect ourselves and our loved ones or to run scared. And PTSD also affects the prefrontal cortex, which is a cerebral cortex covering the frontal lobe. It's responsible for your attention and decision making, emotions, and behaviors. Therefore, when this is disturbed, it can cause a great deal of problems and could be responsible for a lot of the symptoms that PTSD disorder sufferers have to contend with. Now, for females, they're typically, in addition to the other things, they're found to be more likely to be easily startled, to not deal so much with their emotions, kind of emotionless or cold in situations where you would expect them to have more emotion. They tend to be avoidant of things that would remind them or would spark a memory or cause them to rehash any of those feelings. And they typically deal with depression a little worse than males. And males typically get angry. They have impulsive behaviors. They're the ones who typically get into alcohol and drugs. And they also sometimes have to deal with paranoia. I did a few interviews, and the situations were quite interesting. One was a 20-year-old female. Her grandfather was putting away a shotgun, and as he went to put the shotgun up, he doesn't claim that he had his finger on the trigger or anything like that. He says that it was just loose, and it was a sliding shotgun, and when it slid back, it went off, and the bullets went into her back and her arm and into the wall, and I was able to actually see where there are still holes in the wall from where these buckshot pellets went through. She got buckshot in her back, around her spine. She had it in the back of her arms. The actual percussion of when the shotgun went off was enough to knock her down, and she, because it was in a very small area where it went off, and she was young. She was young. I want to say she said she was 12 years old or 13 years old when this happened, and she rushed to the hospital and had some bullets removed from the back of her arm, but the ones in her back were left there, and she experienced PTSD from this incident. She had aspired to be a law enforcement officer, and was actively in the junior officers with the sheriff's office locally here, and was unable to continue with them because of the firearm situation. She was scared of firearms, couldn't deal with loud noises, wouldn't go to the fireworks anymore. To this day, at 20 years old, she still experiences extreme situations of PTSD, lots of sleep disturbances and flashbacks, and a lot of times where she'll just have a really hard time due to that situation. I also interviewed an anonymous young man who had turned to drugs and alcohol because of his post-traumatic stress disorder. He was involved with a house fire due to his mother's neglect, and also had to experience his mother overdosing on heroin and had to rush her to the hospital himself at 11 years old. It was a very difficult time for him, and he just was never able to recoup from that. The post-traumatic stress disorder has affected his life dramatically, and now he has a child of his own, and he's still dealing with his demons of drug and alcohol abuse, and he fights that fight every day, and he deals with the trauma every day. He does show signs of anger and impulsiveness. The other interview I did was an older woman who's in her 40s, and she had a very traumatic childhood growing up. She was in what would seem to have been considered a cult. The uncle where she stayed, her mother was emotionally distant or not interactive, and therefore she lived primarily with her uncle and his wife and their daughter, and it was a lot of emotional abuse of you're no good, you're a harlot and a whore, and you're going to hell. You have your demons are causing other people to be sick, and your demons are hurting everybody else, and can't you control your demons? And there was a lot of extreme physical stuff with spankings, and but more than just spankings, more like beatings with the switch. But there was also a lot of sexual overtones involved in the discipline, where the children would have to spank each other. They'd have to pull down their pants and spank each other in front of the uncle. There was a lot of blaming the children for things that were occurring in the home. And this young lady, or older lady should I say, had experienced a rough life after that. She got out of the house very early and married early, and got into drugs by the time she was 25, and she's dealt with the post-traumatic stress stuff ever since. She did not understand it. She did not know what she was going through, and she didn't realize that she was sick or had a disorder. She just thought it was who she was. And recently she was arrested and put in jail, and while she was in jail she was diagnosed, and it's helped her a lot to be able to start to heal from that and start to be able to control some of the symptoms through, the therapy that she's going through. So people who have post-traumatic stress disorder, there's no cure for them. It's just symptom control. One of the symptom controls is behavioral therapy. And then you have EMDR and SSRIs. But there's also psychotherapy and exposure therapy. Behavioral therapy focuses on the trauma and how it relates to what you're going through currently, where EMDR is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. So the therapist will have you focus on a specific portion of the traumatic event, and you'll follow his hand back and forth as he goes and get you to think deeper and harder about the situation. And for some reason, this triggers like a rapid eye movement kind of situation, like where you're kind of in that beginning early sleep, and it makes your body process it like a dream. So it helps you to process that specific incident or event and help you to feel like it is more of a dream than a reality. And it helps your body to process it and move on. And another thing that they do is the SSRIs, which are medications such as paroxetine, also known as Paxil. And these are great help for situations as far as controlling things like the anger in men or the behavioral issues that sometimes arise. However, when someone is on this medication for a long period of time, their body and their emotional status, mental status becomes very addicted to it. And when they're taken off of it, they regress greatly, and usually pretty quickly. They also have psychotherapy. So psychotherapy is like just talking about it, where you sit down with the counselor and you discuss it and you get it out and you share your feelings and how you're feeling and how you think it's affecting you. It's more self-driven than therapist-driven. And then there's exposure therapy. This allows you to safely revisit that kind of a traumatic event and reprocess it through a safe place and realize that you're safe now. So in order to be diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, you can either be diagnosed by a regular doctor or a psychiatrist, but it requires a physical and psychological evaluation. And it's a rough thing to have to deal with on a daily basis. Some of the people that I interviewed I know quite well, and I've had to watch them go through these situations and how it's affected their lives, and it's hard, and sometimes it's hard to be understanding, but you have to research the topic and learn a little bit and try to first recognize what's happening